Welcome to GMDC Connect videocast. I'm glad you could join us today. I'm Keith Wipazinski, Vice President, Business Development and Chief Member Officer here at GMDC. And we are pleased to bring to you today this videocast, Evolution or Revolution, the Impact of Digital Shopping in Stores in partnership with Nielsen. Before I introduce our speaker, I do want to let you know we will be taking questions after today's session, which can be typed in by joining the instant messenger chat on your screen. If for some reason you also lose the videocast, this whole presentation will be available in our archive section at gmdcconnect.org. So let's get going with today's videocast. It is my pleasure to introduce Nikhil Sharma, Vice President, Consumer and Shopper Analytics of Nielsen. Welcome, Nikhil.
Thank you so much, Keith. I really appreciate the partnership from GMDC, and I want to extend a warm welcome to everyone who is attending this webcast as well. We've got a fun topic in store for you today. It's focused on how you might think about winning with digital shoppers. By way of introduction, my name is Nikhil Sharma. I lead the Shopper Insights team for Nielsen in the US. And I can tell you from personal experience that these days when I have a conversation around shopper insights, digital is certainly part and parcel of the conversation. So it's a pleasure to speak with you today. My own background is about 15 years working with consumer products as well as pharmaceutical clients, and primarily within the CPG and pharmaceutical space, focused on consulting as well as analytics. So welcome. If we move on to the next slide, our agenda today is essentially threefold. I will paint a current state of digital shopping. I'll provide you some perspective on changes and trends we're seeing in the industry. Then we'll switch gears and talk about how we might think about unlocking the opportunity. And then in our third section today, we'll talk about some of the industry best practices we see and what some leading marketers have done to actually capitalize on the opportunity out there available from digital. Towards the end, we'll have some time for questions, so certainly welcome your participation during this process. Next slide, please. So I always find it helpful to start this conversation on digital shopping by doing sort of a level set. So what is it that we mean by digital shopping? Quite simply, we can break this into a simple construct where on the one hand, you have the act of buying something online. So the purchase actually occurs online. You think about e-commerce or mobile commerce as some fairly common activities. And so this is where you might buy a product online, but either have it shipped to you or pick it up from a central location, but the actual transaction occurs online. On the other hand, you have activities associated with shopping online. So this is where the actual transaction might happen in a brick and mortar store. But during the shopping process, you may have a reason to go online, read product reviews, access recommendations, clip coupons, things of that nature. And so these activities can occur across any platform. Could be a computer, desktop, a mobile device, a smartphone or tablet, etc. But all are included when we talk about this broad definition of digital shopping. And for purposes of today's conversation, what we will do is focus on the consumer products industry for the most part, although there are parts when we'll reference some best practices from other industries as well.
You were breaking up like crazy.
Oh.
The next slide, please.
It's running great in here.
So there are many forces that are influencing the way people shop these days. We've listed out a few sort of macro trends impacting shopping. On the left here, there are consumer trends which are changing. So the face of America at the moment is changing. We've got immigration, we've got growth in boomers, we've got urbanization and shrinking family sizes. So all these macro trends are really changing who we're marketing to as consumers and shoppers, and that's manifesting itself in new digital shopping behaviors. We also see a fair amount of changes from a retail landscape perspective. So we're seeing For instance, big box stores coming up with smaller store formats, food retailers selling non-food products. So there's a lot of change at retail, and we'll see some examples of that in a few minutes from now. And then technology is a constant part of our lives. Most of us have smartphones or tablets, and we access those devices multiple times during a day for many different things, some of which include shopping activities as well. And so what these are doing is obviously giving rise to new digital shopping behaviors, things like finding group deals on Groupon or going to coupons.com and accessing online coupons for products, etc. And these are shopping behaviors that didn't necessarily exist 5 or 10 years ago. So if we move to the next slide, we can see what the rate of growth is really in this digital shopping space. On the left, you have some statistics which really speak to the fact that e-commerce is a fairly attractive growth area, both right now as well as well into the future. This is by far the fastest growing channel within the consumer product space. It's growing at a rate of more than 25% annually, and by our estimates, we expect this to represent about 5% of CPG sales within the next few years. So, by all measures, this is a high growth area. And if we look at not just the aspect of buying things online, which is e-commerce, but also the digital shopping area per se, what we see on the right is roughly 30% of people are actually engaging in some sort of online shopping activity when they're shopping. So that's indicated by the blue and the orange pieces on the pie chart on the right. And what this suggests to us is, certainly there's an appreciable base of people that are shopping online, but there's significant upside that still remains, because the 70% that don't engage in it today, chances are that as some of those macro trends continue to impact shopping, we'll continue to see the gray part of the pie chart shrink and some of the blue and orange parts expand. Now, next slide, please. So part of the reason we actually see that a lot of people don't shop online has to do with some inherent barriers to shopping online. So for instance, on this chart, we see a few key reasons why people may not be engaging in digital shopping. If we look at some statistics, say from bottom to top here, the bottom factors being the most significant factors, we see that 74% of shoppers actually feel that the grocery store is more convenient, and so they'll actually go there to shop. 56% find that online websites that retailers have are difficult to use. And so, these, along with reasons such as them not believing that the assortment greater is online, them having a perception that prices on occasion can be higher online, or just any inherent trust in terms of transacting online, might be actual barriers that they perceive that might be preventing them from engaging in digital shopping activities today. But that's not to say that the opportunity is limited, because as I mentioned, this is certainly a space that we're continuing to see some growth in. And if we take a look at the next slide, you'll see why. If we look across some different cohorts, so shoppers such as millennials, it's fairly intuitive to see why a millennial shopper might be more digitally engaged than someone in Generation X or boomers or even the greatest generation. After all, millennial shoppers have actually been around technology for most of their lives. But some facts such as boomers or shoppers in the greatest generation, the percentage of those shoppers that actually like to read product reviews can be some sort of an eye-opening fact for you, as could be facts like 18% of shoppers might actually use an app for your stores while they're shopping. So certainly there's an appreciable and critical mass of people that are engaging in digital shopping activities with you today. If we move on to the next slide, I'll take you through some examples of changes we are seeing in the industry that further support the argument that barriers to digital shopping are constantly breaking down. So For instance, on this page, you see an example of Amazon. Amazon is certainly the biggest retailer in the digital shopping space, and it's certainly the first retailer that comes to mind when we think about the topic of digital shopping. And in the case of Amazon, they've recently launched a luxury beauty store. This beauty store caters to high-end consumers that are looking for cosmetics or fragrances or skincare items. And clearly, the bet that Amazon's made in this particular area is to try to compete with more established retailers like Sephora, and in the process, play in what is a higher profit margin, high growth sector of the industry. So this is an example of Amazon experimenting with new segments of the market and trying to play with them. If we continue to think about Amazon on the next slide, it may surprise you that Amazon as a company, it has invested almost $14 billion on building nearly 50 new facilities in the US since 2010. So what they're trying to do is cater to shoppers in metropolitan areas through these distribution centers. And by some estimates, if they actually build distribution centers close to 20 of the top metropolitan areas in the country, they will be in a position to service roughly 50% of the US shopper base. And so the upside here for Amazon is pretty significant. And if we look at the next slide, you see an example again of them experimenting with new business models to try and engage the shopper. So in this particular example, what we see is Amazon with their Subscribe and Save program, and they're trying to promote regularly scheduled buys. So these are items which we as shoppers may run out of on some sort of a routine basis. And if the replenishment cycle for these is predictable, what Amazon would ideally like shoppers to do is to go and subscribe for these and get these products shipped to them on a regular basis. And in the process, if you do subscribe, and you can save 10% by entering into this business model with Amazon. So these are things that Amazon's doing. We have a few other examples of other retailers that are equally energetic about their efforts in this space. So on the next slide, we see Walmart, and Walmart is certainly a retailer that is experimenting fairly aggressively in this space as well. Recently, they added Denver to a list of cities that they're testing online grocery delivery. And with the service, basically, you can get grocery items as well as general merchandise delivered to your doorstep pretty much the same day in these 5 locations. The next slide, we have an example of a retailer called Fresh Direct. What Fresh Direct did is they recently opened up a new pickup location just outside the Midtown Tunnel in New York City. So if you work in the city and you tend to do your CPG shopping online, what you could do is on your way back home, when you exit the Midtown Tunnel, you can go ahead and pick up your groceries at a new pickup location that Fresh Direct has launched, and it simplifies the shopping process for a shopper. On the next slide, we have a very interesting example of a new startup called Instacart. They actually started in the Silicon Valley area, and recently they expanded to Chicago and Boston on the back of the success they saw. But this is a very interesting business model because it involves very low fixed cost. Essentially, what they've been able to do is to get people to shop online and match those people with shoppers that are registered with Instacart. And so these personal shoppers are quite willing to go to stores like Trader Joe's or Whole Foods or Costco even, and pick up the items that you might have ordered online and bring them to your doorstep. So this is a model, again, where it's connecting consumers with shoppers with very low startup costs, and they've had really good success in the digital shopping space. Just a couple more examples. So on our next slide, we have Target, which is, again, a great example of a retailer that is trying to provide a seamless shopping experience to shoppers, regardless of where they might shop. This is their omni-channel strategy. And essentially what they want to do is provide consumers the ability to buy things online, but go and pick it up in different stores. So this is their attempt at essentially keeping pace with retailers like Walmart or Best Buy. And they've recently launched this nationwide, which offers a certain convenience service to shoppers as well. The last example we see is of Peapod, and recently what they've done is they've expanded their number of pickup locations in the country. So what they have is approximately 120 locations now that they have expanded to, and in these locations, people are free to buy things online and then go ahead and pick them up at different locations within at these pickup locations that Peapod has. They have drive-through facilities as well, so you can buy things online and drive up and get the things you ordered loaded into your car, and you're essentially done with the shopping process. So through the past 5 minutes or so, what we've seen is just a tremendous amount of experimentation that's going on in this space. And if we move to the next slide, it often begs the question of, this is such a dynamic space. Digital shopping behaviors are growing. Certainly people have some concerns about digital shopping today, but with the experimentation that is indeed happening in this space, these barriers are breaking down over time. And so the question for us as marketers tends to be, how do we succeed? I mean, this seems like a challenging process to even keep up, let alone succeed. And so that provides a good segue into the second discussion topic, where conceptually what we'd like to do in the next section is to take you through how you might think about the opportunity that digital represents, and how you might think about organizing your digital shopper marketing activities to take advantage of this opportunity. Next slide, please. So on this particular slide, what we see is that core shopper needs, they've essentially remained the same. These are needs that have persisted for a couple of centuries now. And essentially, it's reassuring to note that these needs still persist. And these are fairly common needs, as you might expect, that shoppers have when they're shopping. So the need for things like price value, or the need for assortment, or security. And so these needs, again, have persisted for centuries now. They've impacted retailing. They led to the growth of store formats like convenience stores, dollar stores, hypermarkets, etc. And certainly these are shopper needs that are also driving the growth of new digital shopping behaviors. In terms of digital shopping behaviors, for instance, if we focus on price value, shoppers really want a retailer to accept paper coupons when they go online and print those coupons. Of course, they're looking for low prices in the digital shopping environment as well. And quite often they're looking for free or low-cost shipping options when they shop online. Similarly, if we look at the assortment need that a shopper has, they're likely, again, to have a similar set of needs that you might expect in a brick-and-mortar store, where they're expecting high-quality products. They're expecting to have access to the brands they like, and certainly they're expecting variety when they shop digitally as well. So some of these core needs and how they manifest themselves in the shopper's mind are key. And it's really important for you as a marketer to understand, with your shoppers, what some of these priority needs are, because the best successes in terms of being successful in digital shopper marketing activities will only occur if you've organized the business model in a way to meet these needs. So if we look at the next slide, what I'd love to do here is to introduce you to how we might think about the opportunity that digital shopping might present. So the first area where the opportunity exists is this area of where people buy. And so digital can really be used to influence where people buy and drive e-commerce. But one important consideration for you, and we'll talk about that in a minute, is the role that your product or category essentially plays in e-commerce. The second area tends to be around the shopper marketing opportunity. So regardless of where shoppers might buy, you still have an opportunity through digital to engage with them and influence where they shop. And so what this then suggests is that digital touchpoints can be very important in terms of how you engage shoppers and drive business outcomes in your favor. So if we move to the next slide and take a look at both of these opportunity areas, starting with the first one, that tends to be using digital to influence where people buy. So, as I suggested, there certainly can be a significant e-commerce opportunity for you in the digital sphere, and often that's dictated by certain inherent characteristics of your product that could serve as either headwinds to e-commerce or tailwinds. And so on this particular page, we have an example of two barriers as well as two enablers that might dictate your success in the e-commerce space. So if you think about the urgency barrier, for instance, this is where shoppers may have a need to buy your products immediately, or they may have a need for those products at short notice. So things like pain medication or perhaps candy bars might come to mind. And these are perhaps needs where shoppers are unwilling to shop online and wait for the product to be delivered to them. They have a need, it's immediate, and they need gratification immediately. So the urgency barrier may work against you in e-commerce. The inspection barrier is very interesting too, because if shoppers feel the need to interact with products, so it could be things like vegetables or produce or seafood or meat in a store, if they need to inspect those products and perhaps even and touch and feel and have that sensory experience with products, again, that might be a barrier to them shopping online because they get the gratification that they need by shopping in a store. So these two are examples of headwinds that we might think of when we think about e-commerce. And conversely, there are certain enablers or tailwinds that could benefit e-commerce as well. So one likely one is the stock-up enabler, and this is where essentially if products have a steady use-up rate, we saw an example of that with Amazon Subscribe and Save program. So products such as paper towels or toilet paper or perhaps laundry detergent, these are products which have a steady use-up rate with shoppers, and people are willing to stock up on these products because they don't expire. These are products that are well positioned for e-commerce growth. And similarly, the price enabler. So if we think of products which are more expensive, there's inherently more margin associated with those products. And so that provides both the manufacturer as well as the retailer some leeway to invest in the e-commerce infrastructure because there's a higher profit margin associated with those products. So again, certain characteristics of your product can dictate whether the urgency barrier, the inspection barrier, the stock-up enabler, as well as the price enabler are at play, and essentially put some constraints or dictate the degree to which you might be successful in e-commerce. If we switch gears and look at the second area of opportunity, which has to do with digital shopper marketing, again, digital can be used very effectively to influence how people shop. And so what's key here is for us to recognize that people have a path to purchase. The path to purchase as a concept has been around for a little while now in the industry. And at its core, it's basically a decision-making process that people go through when they shop. So they're doing things like, when they have a need for a product, they're doing things like planning their trips, deciding which stores to shop at, as well as interacting with the retail environment and making choices within that setting before ultimately making a transaction or a purchase. So as marketers, it's really important for us to try to embrace a few key marketing principles that, again, can dictate how successful we will be in terms of our digital shopper marketing efforts. The first one tends to be around knowing the shopper. The second one is understanding the category or the product that they're purchasing and some of the context associated with the shopping trip itself. And the third one tends to be this idea of using the right digital touchpoints to engage shoppers. And this can often dictate the degree to which you will be successful in digital shopper marketing. So over the next few slides, what I'll do is I'll take you through some of these principles, and hopefully it'll be helpful in terms of organizing your thoughts. On our next slide, we clearly see that digital shoppers are not all alike. We've done some segmentation work recently at Nielsen, and through that, we've discovered that at the highest level, there are 3 buckets of shoppers. One bucket that we'll call online reluctance, which represents about 36% of the total shopper base. These are people that spend a little bit of time on the internet, but they think retailer websites are difficult to use. They don't necessarily trust the retailers with credit card information, or they don't trust the online shopping process per se, so they are sporadically engaged in online shopping. Then there's a bucket in the middle of shoppers that aren't necessarily very involved in the shopping process. We call them grab and go shoppers. They don't necessarily plan very much, but again, they're open to the online shopping environment, and they feel it's trustworthy. They get a good assortment in terms of products, and they're able to get good value from their purchases. And the third bucket of shoppers, which is online advocates. So, this is really sort of a star segment, if you will, for digital shoppers. These are people that love the online environment. They really love to interact with other people in the online environment as well. So social media tends to be pretty important and key for them. They're generally on the leading edge of adoption and trying out new products and ideas. So the more online advocates you can have within your portfolio, chances are that you increase the probability that your efforts will be successful. But again, we're seeing that it's not a one-size-fits-all environment from a shopper perspective, and it's really key for you to know, specifically for your business, what types of shoppers do you have and how best can you go about marketing to them. The second principle we see is this notion of understanding the category and the occasion. So that really matters, and different categories of products attract different levels of digital engagement. We see on this particular slide an example of 2 products, diapers as well as baby food. So these are 2 products that are sort of on the high end in terms of attracting digital engagement with shoppers. Again, it's not surprising for us to see that the level of digital engagement is fairly similar at a high level between diapers and baby food. So in the case of diapers and baby food, the core shopper tends to be mom who is purchasing products for her child. And in this particular case, 62% of all moms, call it, are engaged with some sort of digital activity during the shopping process. With baby food, it's 54%. But like I mentioned, the context and the path to purchase really matters as well, because if we take a closer look at diapers versus baby food, the decisions that shoppers are trying to make when they purchase diapers versus baby food are often quite different. So in this particular case, we see for diapers, they're essentially dealing with the online environment to try and get deals and access deals and bargains during the shopping process, whereas some of their activities during the shopping process for baby food are more geared towards getting information and educating themselves more around new brands of products. So the core need that digital fulfills for even the same shopper at times can vary significantly, and it's important to recognize what the category is, the level of digital engagement it's likely to attract, and what some of the decisions that shoppers are making in the context of their overall shopping trip. And the last tenet that we tend to look at when we think of a marketing strategy or a digital shopper marketing strategy is this idea that touch points really matter. We saw an example of that on the prior slide, but this brings it to life a little bit more in that if we continue to look at that contrast between diapers and baby food, because the shopper mindset is more towards finding a deal when they tend to purchase diapers, they tend to use coupon sites to a fair extent. Whereas with baby food, the top touch point that shoppers are actually engaged with tends to be brand emails. So again, there's a distinction in terms of what touch points actually shoppers default to, given their needs and what they're trying to accomplish from that overall shopping process. So let's pause here and kind of recap where we've been so far. We've taken a look at essentially trends in the digital shopping landscape, and we've noticed that there's a lot of dynamic activity going on in this space. And we've conceptually walked through some principles in terms of how you might think about capitalizing on this opportunity, both from an e-commerce perspective as well as from a digital shopper marketing perspective. So what I'd like to do right now is segue into our third section and share with you some examples of best practices and success stories from the industry. And we'll look at examples both from CPG as well as non-CPG clients. And so the core theme here is essentially our best practices for the role of digital. So if we move on to the next slide, please. What we see is as people shop and they go through the path to purchase, we as marketers, we're trying to accomplish different outcomes with those shoppers. And those outcomes can range from, at the early stages, engaging prospects to acquiring new customers, inspiring usage and trial of your products, and then ultimately fostering loyalty. And so this construct helps us to think through, in the context of the shopping path to purchase, what marketers are trying to achieve and how we might think about which of these objectives matter more to us or less to us in terms of our overall marketing efforts. And an example of, again, how you might continue to think through this is illustrated on the next page, which is almost in the form of a brand maturity curve or an S-curve in this case. So what we see here is brands that are new and that are fairly new entrants to the market. They're probably looking to engage prospects. So, companies like SodaStream are good examples where really what they're focusing on is providing more educational content to shoppers with a view to try and provide information around their products and build awareness around their products and brand. You have a company like Netflix, which again is right in the middle. And what Netflix is trying to do is, essentially acquire more shoppers. They're trying to do so by simplifying the sign-on process, by offering new deals if you become a new customer with Netflix. And so they're using digital tactics pretty successfully to try and achieve the second outcome, which is acquiring shoppers. On the far right, for instance, you see a more mature brand, well-known brand such as Coca-Cola. And what Coca-Cola is using digital for really is to try and reinforce positive images about the brand and foster a sense of loyalty amongst shoppers towards the Coca-Cola brand. And so, they have very different business objectives than a brand like SodaStream might with the whole digital set of tools. So if we, let's take a look at a few examples of how companies might have engaged prospects or acquired customers or inspired usage or maybe even driven loyalty by perhaps looking at some best practice examples from other industries. So on our next slide, here's an example of Ford. So the Ford Motor Company, as you all know, they launched the Ford Fiesta a few years ago, and it had tremendous success. And a big driver of that success was the fact that they leveraged digital very successfully in terms of their marketing efforts. So what they used the social platform to do was to engage millennial customers. And in this particular case, what they did was they literally just handed out 100 or so cars to key opinion leaders in the social media sphere, and asked those key opinion leaders to document their experiences using the vehicle and upload it into social media. So the videos went viral, and Ford certainly benefited a lot through that process. They reached about 60% unaided awareness of their product just by leveraging social media, which we can all agree is a very impressive number. And it's reinforced their desire to replicate the same strategy for the 2014 launch of their Ford Fiesta model. So that's an example of a company that's engaged prospects using digital. The next example brings to life some efforts from P&G. P&G, as we all are probably very familiar with, they had an incredibly successful campaign around Old Spice. And what they tried to do was to acquire new customers through this campaign. So the ad campaign was pretty humorous, and it allowed P&G to interact with an entirely new demographic of shoppers, and using social as a platform also gain feedback from those shoppers along the way. And so they had tremendous success. They had 228 million YouTube views and 188 billion low-cost impressions that would have taken a fortune with traditional ways of advertising. And so this is a great success story where they're able to acquire an entirely new demographic of shoppers and bring them into the Old Spice brand using, again, digital as a platform. On the next slide, we see an example of efforts from Unilever, which have really met with widespread success. It started with the Dove Evolution campaign, where what Unilever did was they encouraged people to try their products, and they documented improvements in skin appearance by using Dove products over a few months, and shrunk that into a Dove Evolution campaign. And this cost them about $135,000 total in terms of the ad campaign, but it allowed them to drive roughly $150 million worth of business. So immensely successful campaign from a Unilever perspective. And it reinforced their decision to continue with this strategy and even expand it to other brands like I Can't Believe It's Not Butter or Starbucks ice cream. And so again, a hugely successful effort where they were able to inspire usage amongst existing shoppers and grow the franchise, as well as extend this concept to new brands within the corporate portfolio. Lastly, we have Xbox as an example, and they've used on the next slide. So we see Xbox has essentially used the digital platform to foster loyalty. In the case of Xbox, what they realized was that social care is critically important, and when people are playing video games or interacting with media or watching programs using their Xbox, if they run into a problem, they would like immediate support. And so what Xbox did was they made themselves present on various social media platforms with the idea of providing quick support to shoppers. And from research that most of us might be privy to already, a good impression or a positive impression in the social media sphere tends to generate almost 3 times the amount of recommendations that that a not so great impression might. And so this was an example where they had an existing shopper base. They serviced a core shopper need, which was timely customer support, and they were able to generate some goodwill for the brand this way as well. So hopefully what this gives you is some examples of how marketers in the space have essentially used digital to achieve certain marketing objectives and business outcomes. So what we've covered so far, again, is this idea of a changing landscape, some ideas on how to think about capitalizing on this opportunity, and bringing it to life a little bit with examples of what some leading marketers have done using digital as a platform to drive business benefit. So this brings us to our third and actually a fourth and final section during the webinar today, which is essentially a wrap-up of key takeaways before we open the floor for any questions you might have. So on our next slide, what we have is essentially a few implications that we've seen so far. The future is clearer, but it's not yet quite set. There are changes happening to store trips. E-commerce is certainly growing, and shoppers continue to want to shop both online as well as in store. The path to purchase is fairly complex, and there are many different ways to engage shoppers during the entire shopping process and market to them. And there's also a significant amount of shifting going on between planned and unplanned purchases. And so there's a lot of dynamic change that's prevalent within the space. And in order to make sense of it, in order to capitalize on the opportunity, what we're seeing is on the next slide, we're seeing new business models emerging. There's models like click and collect that we saw, or click and pick up anytime that we saw with Fresh Direct. And so there are these new business models emerging. But what's key is some core principles to keep in mind if we are to be successful, because there's a lot of experimentation. There will likely be many winners and perhaps not so successful marketing efforts as well. But what will improve your odds of success on this slide is, essentially this idea that shoppers want to shop online and they also want to shop in brick and mortar stores. So your mindset has to be more of an omni-channel perspective. And you have to keep these core shopper needs of convenience, of price value, and of choice in mind. And if you keep these in mind, then you're essentially going to improve the chances of being successful in your digital shopper marketing efforts. So on the next slide, just a few key takeaways for us to keep in mind moving forward. One, it's critically important to know the shopper and understand what their needs are, and set up a business model that's catered exclusively towards meeting those needs. The omni-channel, again, is a reality. We have to accept it, and we have to organize the business model to provide more of a seamless experience to shoppers, regardless of where they shop. It's also important to recognize that the path to purchase has evolved and will continue to evolve. And so it's incumbent upon us as marketers to focus on the right tactics to engage shoppers with. And then again, keep in mind that the goalpost will continuously keep moving on this journey. And so this is not a one and done type of approach, but this is one which requires continuous improvement. And so it's incumbent upon us to keep going on this constant improvement journey. So with that in mind, again, I would like to thank GMDC. I'm done through the presentation portion of my meeting, and I'd basically turn it over to Keith and open the floor for any questions.
Thank you, Nikhil. I think if you're okay, I think we have a few minutes to take a few of the questions that we have received during your presentation. The first one that came in was, the examples you give are pretty large manufacturers that have high awareness in the market. Can you recommend ways a manufacturer that's trying to build brand equity can start developing an online presence?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you, Keith. So if I understand correctly, the question is around, if you're starting small, how do you best compete in the digital space? And it's an interesting one, because if you're starting small and you're trying to grow and build brand equity, chances are that you have a finite amount of resources and a plethora of options that you could potentially pursue. And in many respects, this is analogous to sport, right? Where I'm a big fan of sports, so I'll take tennis as an analogy. It's a sport I love. If you're a tennis player and you're competing in any way, your core objective or your immediate objective is to win that next point, because that allows you to win, games and sets and matches in tennis, right? And so, essentially what you want to do is, again, recognize your strengths. There are certain aspects that you might be good at. For example, in tennis, you might be good at a serve or volleying. And so if you extend that to the business world, there are certain strengths you might have as a company, whether it's a uniquely great product, or perhaps a solid platform that's associated with cause marketing, or perhaps health and wellness, some of these broad platforms that we see in the industry. So it's important to recognize your strengths. At the same time, it's important to understand where some of your biggest weaknesses might be, because it's important to be adequate in areas where you might be weak. You don't have to be the best in class in areas where you're weak, but certainly it's important to be adequate. So again, just continuing with our tennis analogy, if your backhand is pretty weak, you might practice on your backhand and try to get it to an adequate level so that you remain competitive. In this particular case, in the business world, you want to focus on certain weaknesses and essentially plug them with the idea of trying to remain competitive. And then the last principle is, again, that you need to focus. You need to try and get quick wins. There's a plethora of digital marketing tactics, but again, you have to be discerning about which touch points you use and adapt your strategy based on these quick wins and early successes, because these are ones that will essentially drive momentum in the space. So again, it's a very similar playbook for companies that are starting small, except you just have to be more discerning and focused, because the amount of resources you have at your disposal are somewhat finite.
Okay. Here's another good one I think that's come in. As a retailer, How can a retailer integrate themselves into the consumer path to purchase decision, either by themselves or with manufacturers?
That's a great question, and certainly I'm sure there are some retail participants on the call as well. So very relevant to the conversation at hand. Again, when we think about retailers, the old world was manufacturers engage with shoppers pre-store, and retailers engage with shoppers in the store, and these lines were almost clear demarcation, and so the territories were fairly well defined. In the current context, again, there's a lot of crossover. So retailers certainly have an opportunity to engage with shoppers along the entire path to purchase. So, for instance, if you're trying to build awareness or consideration or even preference among shoppers, digital can be a great way to interact with shoppers and let them know about your brand, about your core offerings and values, and start to gain share of mind amongst shoppers. Another area could be, for instance, when shoppers are planning their trips, even before they set foot in a store, through the smartphone or perhaps tablets and the app environment, you have an opportunity to engage those shoppers in the planning process and provide them functionalities like shopping lists or access to products and prices and reviews and things of that nature, and essentially to start to steer choices in your favor even before they've set foot in a store. Another area could be, for instance, influencing store choice. And so retailers can often engage in just-in-time marketing. I often find that when I step out to lunch, for instance, right around noon, I don't have a place in mind to go to, and if I get a text message from a restaurant that's close by, I might decide to go there on a short notice. And so again, you can steer store choice through digital as well. And finally, this notion of driving conversion, or perhaps driving incremental sales with shoppers and embracing loyalty, these also cascade pretty well to retailers. So we look at Safeway as an example. It's one example of a leading retailer that with their Just For You platform, digital platform, it's really figured out ways to use shopper information in a constructive way and personalize offers and gain feedback from shoppers, and continue to reinforce both store choice as well as loyalty with the Safeway brand. So that's, again, a great example of a success story with a retailer engaging with shoppers throughout the entire path to purchase.
Well, great. Well, I think that's all we have time for today. Nikhil, I want to thank you and Nielsen for bringing us today's videocast. I want to remind everybody you can view this and other previous videocasts in the archive section of gmdcconnect.org. And be sure to check out the future list of GMDC videocast events, including the March 27th videocast, in which Nielsen will also be presenting an overview of the new GM General Merchandise hierarchy. Thank you again, Nikhil, and thank everyone for your participation. Have a great day.